Hi everyone, this is Jason Burack of Wall Street from Main Street. Welcome back to another Wall Street from Main Street podcast interview. Today's special guest is a returning guest. He really needs no introduction. He's the longtime US Congressman, best-selling author. He's one of the greatest American statesmen of the last few generations. And he co-hosts the Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Over 140,000 subscribers, over 13 million views on YouTube, and if YouTube wasn't censoring him, he'd probably be rich from that channel. Dr. Ron Paul, thank you for joining me again.
Jason, nice to be with you.
Now, Dr. Paul, I want to ask you a question, and some of my listeners are going to get upset about this, but do you think that President Trump is a neocon?
Probably not in the true sense of the word, but that doesn't mean that he isn't influenced by the neocons. He obviously is, and what makes you wonder whether is he just erratic or whether deep down inside he is because of his appointments. And that's a thing that I ponder. I go back and forth, but I just look at the conclusion at the very end, and that's all that counts, is that frequently he sounds like he doesn't strongly identify with neocons, but his policies frequently do. But so he vacillates back and forth so much. So labeling him is down on my list of priorities, figuring that I'm just going to look at the individual policies. When he does something that I think is positive, I compliment him and encourage him to keep doing it. But sometimes, just like recently he said one thing and the next day it was changed, and I figure, Bolton and Pompeo and these other guys got him, and they've influenced him. So I think it'll be a long time before anybody can perfectly label him. I don't think it's ever going to occur because I don't think he originates from a basic set of beliefs, and that can be a mixed bag, but it's almost better than never considering anything other than neocons. So when he makes a move toward peace, I compliment him. If he's moving toward war, I complain.
I think that's a great way of looking at things, because before he was president years ago, obviously he has a really long and active Twitter history. He was heavily criticizing the Iraq war. He was very anti-Iraq war with his tweets, but now he wants huge military spending increases. So, that's either he's hiring too many neocons. With John Bolton, he's becoming influenced by way too many. The John Bolton hire did worry me, though. Maybe he wanted the neocons off his back, and he brought in Bolton so they would stop harassing him.
Yeah, it's hard to figure out what goes through his brain and why he makes these decisions, but it doesn't seem like his appointees are exactly in sync with him. So I guess we have to just keep an eye on him.
So this Trump-Putin meeting in Helsinki, you have the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. When the Russia is officially labeled by the U.S. government, I guess, as an adversary, but when two of these big countries, and both of them are nuclear powers, are sitting down and negotiating maybe trade deals or peace, I think that's a good thing. But the mainstream media, the Democrats, seem against this. So do you think that they're trying to maybe push World War III, or why do you think they're talking about some people like the former head of the CIA are talking about treason then for Trump even trying to have a peaceful discussion?
Well, it's hard to try to figure out exactly what their strategy is, but it suggests to me that they're almost acting childishly, and they react emotionally, and they react from anger, and I think they were so shocked about the loss of the election that even if he had a policy identical to what Obama did, they hate him so much that they wouldn't be capable of doing this. This sort of contradicts my thesis that, all the big issues are bipartisan, that they all support the Fed, they support overseas intervention, they support the deficits, and they don't really challenge Keynesian economics. But there's this factor of emotions and hatred that seems to confuse the issues. But I think right now what we're seeing is tremendous hatred and shock that Hillary didn't win the election, and therefore you see this mixed bag. But I think when the dust settles, our biggest job is to confront the neocons' influence in foreign policy and what's happening in the deep state and how powerful they are, in spite of what's on in the surface. Because in Washington, Pelosi and Boehner, they would fuss and fume in public, and there was a pretense that they were bitter enemies. But behind the scenes, they did quite well. They connived and they did the budgets, and they would delay the passage of a budget. Then they would have an omnibus bill, and they put all the power and the control into Republican and Democratic leadership. So some of this that we hear, where there's so much antagonism going on, probably a lot of it's real, but some of it is probably strategy of pretending that there's really a two-party system, and then they don't look at the things that they should be looking at. Sometimes when one thing is the biggest thing in the news, I'm always thinking, what are they doing right at this moment? Because they're probably trying to distract us from something nefariously that they're doing.
I think a lot of Democrats do have Trump derangement syndrome. They're still angry about the election, and they seem to hate Trump a lot more than a lot of other Republicans. Maybe it's because Trump at one point was at least a Democrat, and he was donating to a lot of Democrats, and he was hanging out at their parties for a while. But you brought up a very interesting point about Republicans and Democrats. Basically, Jesse Ventura, I think, described this the best. Not sure if you've heard his comparison. He compared this to professional wrestling. And he said, when the cameras are on, you'll have one guy, the heel or the good guy, and you'll have one guy hitting each other over the head with a chair, right? And then afterwards, they'll go to parties and have a beer, and everything will be fine. And it seems that that's the way things have been in D.C. with the Republicans and Democrats. When the cameras are on, when the mainstream media is interviewing them, they talk their rhetoric. And then when, it's time to go to a charity function, it's totally different.
Yeah, and they have to pander to their bases, and I think there is that all the time. And so they're demagogues, and they don't say, well, this is what I believe, and this is what I consistently vote for. They don't seem to have much interest in that. It's maintaining power, and to do that, they have to play that game of pandering and demagoguing. I always thought what you were supposed to do is try to persuade them to your position rather than pandering to their position and pretending that, you're good, we'll do that, and lie to them, but they actually end up lying to themselves. And I think that whole thing that we're talking about is probably the reason why government keeps getting worse and keeps getting bigger, and we keep digging a bigger hole for ourselves. But one day it's going to have to break up, and I think it's going to break up because this is not a functioning system. It works for a long time because we've had a lot of wealth, and we still do, but eventually you run out of wealth and the power to print money, and deficits do have problems. And the Soviet system came down pretty hard and pretty fast without many predictions, and I think our system is vulnerable too because of all these things going on and all this pretense that that we hear about between the struggle between the Republicans and Democrats, and they're not libertarians. They're not non-interventionists. They don't believe in the gold standard. They don't really care about personal liberty, and that's bipartisan. That's what's bipartisan. I think there's way too much bipartisanship when you look at all the serious issues.
And I think the U.S. has become basically the world's largest and most powerful banana republic. So there's not really rule of law anymore because there's not really a functioning justice system. If you're rich and powerful or politically connected, you're basically above the law now. You can commit felonies or buy your way out of, getting guilty or going to prison for the most part. And then on top of that, the U.S. still has the world reserve currency, and the military-industrial complex is basically running the decisions for both political parties. But are you surprised, Ron, that there's finally sunlight shining now on the deep state? Because I'm openly hearing, whether it's on Fox News, I don't watch it that much, but there's actually a lot of people talking about the deep state and, having discussions about corruption in the military-industrial complex and with security clearances. Are you surprised that we're finally actually starting to have some honest conversations about this now?
Yeah, and let's hope it's all positive. I remember when they created the World Trade Organization, and I think President Bush Sr. said, well, this is good. This is the third leg of the New World Order. You know, we had the IMF, the World Bank, and now the trade organization. And he said this is the New World Order. It used to be for 20 years before that, the New World Order was never mentioned. So I thought, why? This is just becoming commonplace. And then also the president of the not the Trilateral Commission, but one of them appears on TV now. So I don't know why all of a sudden everybody's talking about the deep state. It loses effectiveness. Maybe it did become more available. I mean, on Fox, we'll mention it. You got a guy like Tucker Carlson. He'll talk about it. No, I think it's basically good. It's not harmful, but we still have to explain exactly what it means. And those are the powerful forces, banking and financial and military forces, that behind the scenes are able to control a lot of what's happening in government.
And they also control the mainstream media. I mean, it seems to me that a lot of people in the mainstream media, Dr. Paul, want World War III. I mean, they want a new enemy. It's Iran or it's Russia. We live in a society now, and you had Phil Giraldi. I want to bring this up because I thought this was powerful. It's your first Ron Paul Institute conference in 2016. You had former CIA agent Phil Giraldi there, and he was talking about how much the mainstream media, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the CNNs are influenced by the CIA and the deep state with their, foreign policy objectives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they may well be the most powerful, because the people behind the scenes, if they were just talking like so many of us do, we don't have the bully pulpit, and we don't have an ability to get it out. The internet helps us, but if you have all the major medias and actually have a lot of influence on the social media, boy, they have access to a lot of people, so they are very, very powerful. So the message is, one thing, but being able to distribute it is probably one of the biggest deals. And there are probably always limits on it, and I hope that they're going to run into limits on this idea that some have shifted their gears, Bernie Sanders. Well, we can talk about socialism now and really pander to the poor and the unemployed and never blame government for that. So they talk openly more now about socialism, but maybe I would hope, if nothing else, not that I cheer on so many of all the Republicans, but it would be nice to see the people who thought that socialism was the appropriate thing to have these days. I don't wish them success. I hope the American people wake up and realize exactly what's going on.
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, a lot of voters, they're not doing well financially, so if they can vote themselves more free stuff, I think things are going to get worse before they get better. I know you're trying to wake up a lot of people on the Ron Paul Liberty Report, but not a lot of people either want to be woken up or are willing to put in the work to learn. So let's talk now about tariffs and Trump's tariffs and trade wars. I know you've studied financial history, so what is your opinion then on the history of tariffs and trade wars?
Well, I don't think they ever end well. And even if they could point to one and say, hey, look, this is what we did. We saved jobs and what didn't cause a great deal of harm. I look at it as a personal liberty issue, secondarily as an economic issue. And to me, the economic issue is that you and I have a right to spend our money the way they will. It's our lives, and the fruits of our labor should belong to us. And if we can get a better deal by buying overseas, we should, because it's beneficial to us. But it also sends a message to the people here at home that they're not giving the products that we want. So it's really the only part of democracy that I really like is that people can buy and sell freely and wherever they want to, and there's an economic benefit from it. But if we continue this way and this back and forth, this is one thing that it's pretty amazing how Trump has been able to take that, and more or less the establishment economists, even though behind the scenes they were using tariffs and protectionism, but nobody would admit to it. But now he has administrations that champion. His polls keep going up, and the ill effects from this trade war is really not felt yet. But the other thing, what it's doing, why I think they're so bad, it ends up with a currency war, and Trump is really into this. He is really showing anger toward the Chinese because the Chinese are, lowering the yuan, which is, a bit of hypocrisy because that's how we live. We weaken the dollar by printing them like crazy. We have this authority because we police the world and have wealth in the military that we don't want anybody else to ever try to weaken their currency for economic benefit. So we yell and scream at them. But and it's this currency battle that'll ultimately bring everything down. The trade imbalances come from the fact that we get to print the money, spend it overseas. No wonder we buy more stuff from overseas. But those are secondary for what I believe in. You have a right to your life, and the two things I think that indicate that government wants to control and own us is one is the income tax, that everything we make belongs to them unless they allow us to keep it and give us permission. And the other thing is the military draft, which unfortunately has not been around for a while, but they still make young people register for the draft. So that means dictatorial control and the ownership of government, and this is the opposite of what it should be. We should own our own lives and do whatever we want except hurt other people or take other people's property.
Amen. And I think there's going to be a lot of collateral damage from this trade war and, all the subsequent things, whether it's retaliatory tariffs or currency devaluations. A lot of the regular guys are going to get hurt. We're already starting to see some American farmers, whether it's soybeans or pork, we're starting to see them, collateral damage, and Trump's offering subsidies in exchange for that. Trump may win re-election, but he's going to hurt a lot of people and claim victory in this trade war, but he's going to hurt a lot of people in the process. Do you think we're headed towards a lot worse stagflation, though? Because in addition to these tariffs, which are going to raise costs on input costs for businesses in the global supply chain, Trump's planning these very large budget deficits. I like tax cuts. I think they're good. The problem was there was no corresponding cuts in government spending. So, these budget deficits are going to blow out.
Yeah, and I think the statistics on how vibrant the economy is are a bit fictitious. I think the economy, they can find statistics and make everybody feel a little bit better superficially, but we wouldn't have this dissension in this country and the maldistribution of wealth if there wasn't a real problem. The big problem is there are some people who are doing very, very well, and the large majority of American people are doing very badly. And, when you I read some stuff yesterday about the significant increase in homelessness, and we've heard the stories about more people living on the street in places like L.A. and New York City and San Francisco. So they're already in stagflation. The people who are living on the streets, there was one couple they described, and they were making like almost $300,000. The two parents were working, but the homes where they were, I think this was in the Northwest, were so expensive. They just didn't have enough money. So it isn't deflation. There's a lot of inflation, but the prices are going up faster than they can handle. But there's a lot of other people, that are just living on Social Security and other things and pension funds. They always come up short, and the saying is always that there's not enough money. We just need more money, print more money, and give the people more money. But the problem is the destruction of the value. So I think the country, the poor, probably the lower 30-40%, have an inflation rate quite a bit different and a lot more painful than the people who are in a higher income bracket, because percentage-wise, the poor might have to, spend a lot more money on things that are going up faster. Maybe food and clothing and medical care and education might be going up much faster than somebody who's very wealthy, and they may not be big items, but even if they were, it doesn't matter because, they're their income is going up much faster. So I think there's a lot of stagflation going on. I think ultimately, though, when it gets out of hand, it's inflationary depression. And inflationary depression is like what's happened in Venezuela. They don't have a shortage of money. They have money and no control of the loss of value of it. So this idea that there's been deflation is not true. We have a lot of inflation, a lot more than they'll admit to, and I think it's going to get a lot worse.
Yeah, I agree. The Keynesians are still screaming deflation, but President Trump and the economic advisors he has, it looks like there is still implementing supply-side economics. But the last time this was tried with President Ronald Reagan, the debt-to-GDP ratio was under 40%. The current debt-to-GDP ratio, we're already over 100%. And Trump's, planning on much larger budget deficits. The Federal Reserve's planning on reducing their balance sheet. I see a weaker dollar. In the short term, the dollar is strengthening against emerging market currencies and the euro. But in the long term, I think this is bad for the dollar.
Yeah, and people say, well, the dollar's strong, and it depends on what you measure it against. Actually, even currently, right now, you say it's strong because the dollar price is going down. But the real thing is the purchasing power, the overall purchasing power of your dollar. Gold always reflects that eventually, but not always as smoothly and as quickly. But the purchasing power of the dollar goes down. It might be a little bit higher than some of these other currencies, whether it's the yen or the euro or the third world countries. Yeah, that'd be one thing. But it's back to what we were just talking about. People have decent incomes, but they still can't even afford, a rent or buying a house because the prices are so high. Sometimes this one incident I was referring to, I think the average price was $600,000 to buy a house. So that means the dollar is weak because it takes so many dollars, to keep up. And inevitably, the wages and incomes eventually don't keep up with the prices because the prices will be determined emotionally and subjectively and with the supply and demand. So that tends to go up much faster than the salaries. So yes, they raise the minimum wage and a few things like that, thinking, well, this will really help out. But no, the wages never keep up with the printing of money, and we really haven't seen the consequence of QEs. But I think we're starting to see that now, and that's what the activity is all about, and it's going into stocks and different places. But it'll end because none of this stuff could last forever. If it would work for us that we could maintain this currency, it means that none of us would have to work anymore. Why wouldn't we just say, hey, print more, print it faster, give it to us, and we'll just spend it overseas. We'll buy all this stuff from China, and then we'll all live happily ever after. But it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, it's fictional. Okay. Yeah, it's fictional like Keynesian economics, because Keynes said, remember, that we would all have short work hours and everything would be automated. But if things are getting automated now because the politicians are forcing higher wages, there's going to be less people working and they're not going to have money to spend.
Right.
And San Francisco, if I could add to your points there, I think if you make under $120,000 a year, you still qualify for a housing subsidy in San Francisco. So more.
That's a good analogy on what it really means, because the money doesn't mean as much out there. Now, in Texas, that's still pretty good. We have some people that have come from Washington D.C. coming down here, and they say, "Boy, you can really get a nice house for $200,000-$300,000. It would cost $1.5 million or $2 million up in Washington or Virginia." So there's a lot of distraction with when you look at the different prices in the different areas of the country. Okay, give me another one if you have one, but I'll be needing to get out of here in a minute.
Well, I was just going to make a comment that a lot of this monetary inflation, as Austrians call economists, has gone into asset prices first. So the money and credit, the Cantillon effect, has gone into asset prices first. But as we wrap up here, Dr. Ron Paul, I just want to promote your Ron Paul Institute conference on Saturday, August 18th in Northern Virginia at the Dulles Airport Marriott. You're having some fantastic guests speak. So please tell our listeners about a few of the guests.
Well, they're numerous, and I don't have the list here, but there's going to be plenty. And if anybody's interested, what they need to do is go to the Ron Paul Institute webs.org website, and you can get the list of all the people coming. But this is our third year. It's always been great, and everybody's enthusiastic when they get to come and visit us.
Great. Yeah, and it's very affordable. I think it's only $75 and includes lunch. And some of the major guests besides yourself, who I love to hear you speak, are Nassim Taleb, author of the great investing books Fooled by Randomness, Skin in the Game, Black Swan, Gerald Celente, and Lew Rockwell. So hopefully our listeners can join us there.
Very good. Wonderful. See you there.
Please like this video, share it with friends and family, and don't forget to subscribe to the Wall Street for Main Street YouTube channel if you have not already done so. Thanks for helping Wall Street for Main Street pass the 20,000 YouTube channel subscriber milestone despite YouTube censorship. Hopefully, we'll be able to get to 30,000 or even 40,000 YouTube channel subscribers quickly if YouTube doesn't shut down this channel. If YouTube does shut down this channel, remember to also sign up for the Wall Street for Main Street email list that's on the wallstreetformainstreet.com website, and will tell you where the videos are going to be uploaded instead of YouTube. Also, if you really like the content and you decide that you want to give a one-time donation, you can go to the wallstreetformainstreet.com website where there's different options for you to do so. Or you can become a Patreon contributor. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to providing my loyal listeners with some of the best information, analysis, and financial education available out there, free or paid, as I work to grow the podcast and also get my educational technology company funded.